بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم الحمد لله رب العالمين والصلاة والسلام على أشرف الأنبياء والمرسلين نبينا محمد وعلى آله وصحبه ومن تبعهم بإحسان إلى يوم الدين أما بعد. So continuing from where we left off, we began the first discussion, which was the discussion regarding water. So the author here mentions a few different types of water. The first type of water, just a brief recap, was classified as a tahirul mutahhir, water that's pure and it can also purify. So in short, that was any water that remained upon the same characteristics as natural water when water emerges from the ground or when water falls from the sky. The second was a type of water that is purifying. However, it is makruh to use because of some external factor. Water that was warmed up by the sun because of the hadith of the Prophet ﷺ. The third category that we talked about last week, and then we ended off with this one, was at-tahir ghayrul mutahhir. Water that is pure, but it cannot purify you. So the first example of this was water that was already used for wudu. Used water. Once water is used by one person for either wudu or ghusl, to remove either minor or major ritual impurity, that water can no longer be used by another person. You cannot use that water. Now, water is not impure, but that water cannot purify you. In other words, water can only purify a person once. And water that one person used cannot be used. The leftover water, meaning whatever was collected, cannot be used by another person. So that can only be used once. Again, by leftover water, I mean not whatever is left over in the bucket. I'm saying whatever is left over, meaning after you use it, if the water were to fall somewhere and gather, you can't use that water a second time. Or hypothetically, if a person is making wudu and they splash water on their face and some of that water goes on you and then you just wipe that over your face, that's not sufficient. You can't do that. So you can't reuse this water in this manner. Right? And the key point that he mentioned over there is this is the ruling if a person is using a small amount of water. The large quantity of water we'll talk about today. And the second one, which is one that I said I will elaborate upon more this week, is water that something pure was mixed into it. Something pure was mixed into it. Now, because something pure was mixed in, the water is not going to become impure. But that water can no longer be used for wudu. It can no longer purify you. So again, what they mean by this is that you put something inside water that slightly changes the water. Right now, I said that we will slightly understand this using the Hanafi madhab. The reason being is because in the Shafi'i school, it's left a bit more open-ended. It's not as rigorously explained. In the Shafi'i school, the masala is pretty straightforward. They just mention it, that if water remains upon its original characteristics, then that water is pure. If something is mixed inside, then that water is no longer. I mean, it's still pure, but it can no longer purify you. But what exactly does that look like? In a lot of the Shafi'i texts, they don't really elaborate upon this. They just kind of leave it up to the judgment of the person. Right? Some examples they gave was that if a person, for example, has water, and that person throws, for example, some mint leaves inside that water and brews those leaves for a bit, what's going to happen? It's going to turn into tea. No one will refer to that as water anymore. So that's just one easy example that they give. In the Hanafi madhab, again, the overall concept is exactly the same. The concept is the same as the Shafi'i school. What we want water to remain upon the characteristics that rainwater was upon, or that water that emerged from a spring, water that was extracted from a well. Right? The same characteristics these waters have We want this water to have the same characteristics. Now, when do we say that water has changed? So again, we're not allowed to use water that has been changed. So what changes water? So the ulama, they explain it in two different ways primarily. They say that when you mix something with water, it takes two forms. The first one is that something was completely mixed in with that water. With that water, something was totally absorbed into that water. And the example they give of this is that if you cook something in water, what ends up happening? Because when you boil something in water, the particles from that thing, they break apart and they mix with the water. So the one thing that's totally off limits is that if a person was to cook something in that water, now, even if, for example, it doesn't seem to you like there are any remnants of that thing, that water is no longer water that you can use to purify yourself. Because 100%, if you boiled something in that water, for example, peas, you took some peas, you put it inside the water, you boiled it. What's going to happen? Pieces of the peas will mix inside the water. That water is no longer original water. Right? And the scholars, they explain that إِذَا بَرُدَ ثَخُنَا. Okay, maybe right now it seems exactly the same, but let it sit for a bit. When you let it sit for a bit, it's going to start changing color. It's going to become a bit more murky in color. And when it gets colder, it'll get thicker. When it cools down, it'll thicken up. So therefore, it's not the same as original water. Okay, the only exception that they make is that what if you boil something in the water that's meant to make it better, meaning a better purifier? Right? So again, this is something that happens in the subcontinent, also in the Arab world as well, that they take certain leaves, lotus leaves, right, from the lotus tree, and they boil those leaves in water, and usually that water of lotus leaves is what is used to bathe the deceased person. Okay, what is the objective of adding lotus leaves to water? It enhances the purifying ability of water. It makes water even better at purifying. And you have water that purifies, and then you have water with this additional, like minty scent, for example, or you have this water that you added maybe some drops of like liquid soap. Now the water is even better at purifying. So that is something that they have acknowledged is okay. But generally you can't cook something in water and then use that water. Okay, number one. Okay, that's the main thing. Okay, if something falls inside water, or if something is put inside water, you're not cooking it. In the Hanafi school, they say that there's two possibilities here. Either the thing that fell inside was a solid, or the thing that fell inside was a liquid. Okay. Now, in both cases, you're going to look at something else. If the thing that fell inside the water that was mixed with the water is a solid, then in that case, what you are going to take into consideration is tab'ul ma, the nature of water. Now, what is the nature of water? The ulama mentioned two things: al-riqqat wa sayalan. The thing is thin, it's not viscous, it's not thick, was sayalan, and it can easily flow. Meaning, if the water remains such that it flows like regular water, and it's still as thin as regular water, then you can use that water. Even if it changed color, even if the taste changed, even if the smell changed. This is only if a solid were to fall inside the water. So something solid falls inside the water. Something solid falls inside the water. So for example, I don't know, whatever. Let's say somebody took peas and they put it inside water. Or for example, like someone is taking some, I don't know, rice, and they're soaking some rice in water. Okay, is the rice solid? Yes. Okay, now if you soak rice in water, what's going to happen to the water? The color will change? The color will change. But they're saying that if something solid is mixed inside the water, then now we're not looking at the color, we're not looking at the taste, we're not looking at the smell. What are we looking at? The nature of water. Is it still thin like regular water? And does it still flow like regular water? That's what we're going to look at. Okay, now on the opposite end, if a liquid is mixed with water, if a liquid is mixed with water, then now we are going to take into consideration the three attributes of water, the three characteristics of water, which is the color, the taste, and the smell. Okay, now they elaborate upon this too. Some things they differ with water in all three characteristics. All three characteristics. Take, for example, I don't know, red wine vinegar or apple cider vinegar, or the darker vinegar. Right? So not the clear one. Take the darker vinegar, for example. Okay, is the darker vinegar different in smell? 100%. Is it different in taste? Yes, 100%. Is it different in color? Yes. All three things are different. If you have a liquid that differs from water in all three characteristics, if that liquid falls inside the water, if two of the three characteristics are transferred to the water and are noticeable inside the water, you can no longer use that water. If only one of the characteristics is transferred to the water, then you can still use it. So for example, only the color changed, not the taste and not the smell. You can still use it. Only the taste changed, not the color, not the smell. Only the color changed, not the taste, not the smell. Right, like that. So depending. So if something has three characteristics, then if two are apparent or transferred to the water, then you can't use the water. If something has two characteristics, if even one of them shows up inside the water, then right, it will the water you cannot use any longer. For example, clear vinegar has the same color as water, but the taste and the smell are different. If either the taste or the smell transfers to water, then the water is no longer going to be a water that you can use. It's still pure, but you can't use it for wudu. Right? That's what we're trying to understand right now. And the final one is that what if something only differs from water in one attribute? Then obviously if that one single attribute transfers, then that water can no longer be used. And if something matches water in all three attributes, nothing is different, then now we take into consideration quantity. Quantity. Which one is more? If, for example, you have a bucket of used water, and then you have 2 buckets of regular water, and you mix all 3 buckets together. Can you still use that water? Yes. Because the unused water is 2 buckets more than the used water. But vice versa, you would not be able to 2 buckets of used water versus 1 bucket of unused water, and you mix it all together, now you can't use it. Even though technically there's no characteristic that's changing. But you know that you mixed 2 buckets of used water with 1 bucket of unused water. So again, these are some of the details that are found in the Hanafi madhab that what help us understand this. So when something falls inside water, you're gonna sometimes be looking at the characteristics. Sometimes you're gonna be looking at the nature of water. But the underlying principle between both the Hanafi and the Shafi'i madhab are the same. Is that water still just water? Or are you going to call it something else? So what the Hanafi madhab is trying to explain is that if something has, for example, 2 attributes that are different and 1 attribute transferred, you're probably no longer going to call that thing water. If water tastes like orange juice, you're not going to call it water. You're going to call it orange juice. If water smells like vinegar, you're not going to call it water. You're going to call it vinegar. Right? Like that. But for example, like let's say chlorine. Chlorine is clear. Chlorine is clear. If you mix chlorine with water, what changes? Smell. Smell. So now the question comes that can you use water that has chlorine mixed inside? So now you have your answer. Right? In the Shafi'i school, a person would look at this water and say, what? You've mixed something inside the water that is generally not found inside water. We would not be able to use that water. We would not be able to use that water to purify ourselves. Right, like this. So it becomes a bit more clear now, right, the issue that we were talking about last week. So this is the second category, or the second type. Sorry, third category. Water that's pure, but it cannot purify you. So again, if it gets on your clothing, it's not a problem. If it gets on your body, it's not a problem. But you can't use it for wudu. You cannot use it for bathing. Okay, the fourth category, the last one, he calls it al-ma'ul mutanajjis, water that is impure. You can't use it, you can't drink it, you really can't do anything with it. هو الماء الذي وقعت فيه نجاسة. Obviously, it's water wherein impurity fell inside. Okay, وهو قسمان. He goes, there's two types. الأول قليل والثاني كثير. The first one is water which is a small quantity, and the second is water which is a large quantity. Right now, again, this is something that is across all four madhahib, that a large amount of water will not become impure if an impurity falls inside. A large amount, everyone agrees with this. A large amount of water. The only disagreement is what classifies water as being a large quantity. Like, what is a large quantity? Right? So everyone agrees in theory. Again, it's kind of like the previous issue. In theory, everyone agrees. A large quantity of water will not be contaminated by the impurity, a small amount of impurity that falls inside. Or basically any amount of impurity that is not like clearly apparent inside the water. And a small amount of impurity falls inside a small amount of water. Then according to Imam Abu Hanifa, Imam Shaf'i, Imam Ahmad, that water is now going to become impure. According to Imam Malik rahimahullah ta'ala, the water will still remain pure unless the impurity is apparent inside the water. So according to Imam Malik rahimahullah ta'ala, it's a bit of a lenient issue. He uses the hadith of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam. The water is pure, nothing can impurify it except for something that changes the color, the smell, or the taste. It doesn't matter what the quantity is, according to Malik rahimahullah ta'ala. But according to the majority of the ulama, Abu Hanifa, Shafi'i, and Ahmad rahimahullah ta'ala, they differentiate between a small amount of water versus a large amount of water. But now, the major discussion now is what makes water a large quantity. Like, what is the criteria? How much water is a lot of water and how much water is not? So he says over here that in the Shafi'i madhab, the differentiating factor between a large amount versus a small amount is something they refer to as qullatayn. Qullatayn. In modern day measurements, qullatayn is approximately 217 liters. 217 liters. To be honest, it's not that much water. Like, if you were to look at 217 liters, you'd be like, yeah, that's not a lot of water. In the Hanafi madhab, what's classically mentioned, meaning what's famously mentioned, what's the common understanding of the Hanafi ulama, is that if you have a reservoir of water that is 15 feet by 15 feet, again, it doesn't have to be 15, it could be like 10 and 20, doesn't really matter. But basically, approximately 225 feet square, right? The reservoir. That's how large it is. And it's 1 foot deep. So 225 feet squared and 1 foot deep. That much water is a large amount of water. That is almost 5 times the amount that Shaf'i rahimahullah ta'ala is declaring to be a large amount of water. Almost 5 times the amount. It's much bigger. Okay, but a very interesting thing happened. Sometimes certain things become more famous, but they're not necessarily the most accurate. What ended up happening was Imam Shafi'i rahimahullah ta'ala's teacher, Imam Muhammad, who was a student of Abu Hanifa, was sitting in his masjid in Baghdad. He's sitting there, and some of the people from the surrounding area, they come inside and they ask him a question. Then what is a large amount of water? Because we heard that a large amount of water will not become impure if impurity falls inside. What is a large amount of water? So, not giving them the accurate definition, he just said, you know what? مثل حوضي هذا. Like this reservoir that's inside our masjid right here. This one. Like this one. He said, like this one. So people, they went and they measured it and they found it to be 15 by 15 feet. So they're like, Muhammad said 15 by 15 feet is a large amount of water. That's technically not what he said. He just gave them an example of a large amount of Water, he didn't actually define the exact measurement. The most accurate definition in the Hanafi school is Abu Hanifa's opinion. He says that a large amount of water is what people think is large. I mean, ask the people. If they think it's a large amount of water, it's a large amount of water. Meaning whatever you would consider to be a large enough amount of water in society is a large amount of water for you. Okay, this is a very unique opinion that he holds, which is technically many of the ulama who came after really praised him for this. The reason why they praise him is because this is something that kind of caters to everyone. In certain parts of the world, maybe a huge amount of water may still be considered less. But in other parts of the world where water is more scarce, maybe something we would consider to be less, they'd consider to be a lot. Right? And the most accurate definition would be the one that is applicable to all circumstances. Like I said, when we see 217 liters of water, we're probably not going to think it's a lot of water. But maybe in other parts of the world where water is more scarce, for example, in Africa, they'd consider that to be a large amount of water. Right? Parts of the subcontinent, water is scarce, they'd consider it to be a large amount of water. Places where water is usually very hard to come by, they'd be like, oh, that's a pretty large amount of water. For us, to be honest, you have a huge amount of water beside you. It has a tiny amount of impurity. We're probably not going to use it anyway, because we have so much other water. Now, could you use it? Yeah, but we're probably not going to use it. It's like another issue, right? If somebody has a small amount of impurity on their clothing, you're allowed to perform salah. Yeah, but we're probably not going to do that. Right? In most cases, if you see like a drop of urine fell on my clothing, it's not a huge amount, it's a tiny speck. Yeah, but I know it's there, so I'm just going to change. Right? That's just kind of the life that we kind of live. Right? So qullatayn. Now, a very interesting thing happened. Now, according to Abu Hanifa, water, a large amount of water, is something, or is defined as what people consider to be a large amount of water. And according to Shaf'i rahimahullah ta'ala, a large amount of water is qullatayn, 217 liters. Right? Now there was a very famous alim, scholar in the subcontinent, who used to teach hadith. He used to teach Sahih Bukhari, Sunnah Tirmidhi. And he was very famous for conducting many experiments. So one day he conducted an experiment, and he said that this is what the Hanafi say is a large amount of water. This is what the Shafi'i say is a large amount of water. So he's like, yo guys, go outside, and I want you to dig this giant ditch that would probably please the Hanafis in terms of what would be a large amount of water. Dig that small ditch and throw in qullatayn and see what happens. It turned out that the both were actually the same amount. Because remember, when Imam Muhammad said like this reservoir of water, he didn't mean the exact same one. Something like it. So when they would dig something like it, 217 liters approximately of water were dumped inside, and it filled the reservoir. Meaning it satisfied the Hanafi criteria, it also satisfied the Shafi'i criteria. Meaning technically both Imams are not really differing that much. They're almost identical in what they're saying. Okay. Nonetheless, the measurement for qullatayn is 217 liters. 217 liters of water is considered to be a large amount of water. A large amount. Anything less than that would be a small amount. So what happens if impurity falls inside a small amount of water? We do not care how much impurity. We do not care if you can tell it's there or not. All that matters is that you know that the small amount of impurity fell inside, that water is now impure. You cannot use it anymore. Right? So he says that it is any amount that is less than 217 liters when a small amount of impurity falls inside. وَلَمْ يَتَغَيَّرْ فِيهِ شَيْءٍ مِنْ أَوْصَافِهِ. And none of the characteristics even change. Not the color, not the smell, not the taste. That water is considered to be impure. He just then tells us how much it is considered, how much is qullatayn, the amount in modern day measurements, but I already gave that to you. روى الخمسة عن عبد الله بن عمر رضي الله تعالى عنهما قال سمعت رسول الله صلى الله عليه وسلم وهو يسأل عن الماء. So he brings the hadith in support of this, that Sayyidina Abdullah bin Umar radiallahu ta'ala anhu, he reports the hadith. The hadith is in 5 of the 6 famous books. He said, I heard the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam saying, while one day he was being asked about water that exists in the jungle, in the forest. That you have water that exists inside the forest, and you have predatory animals that drink from that water. Now, we know that predatory animals, they consume other animals. That means when they drink from that water, what's gonna transfer? Blood and all these things are gonna transfer into that water. So therefore, the concern is you have some water, right? You have some water, and predatory animals are drinking from that water. Can we use that water for wudu? The Prophet ﷺ said, إِذَا كَانَ الْمَاءُ قُلَّتَيْن لَمْ يَحْمِلِ الْخَبَثِ. If the water reaches the amount of qullatayn, 217 liters approximately, then water will not become impure. That's a large amount. What do we understand from that? If it's not that much, then it's a small amount. So if it hits the threshold of qullatayn, which is 217 liters approximately, then it doesn't matter how many animals are drinking from it. As long as the impurity is not clearly visible. Because it's something everyone will agree with. Like, you're not going to sit there and tell me that this water is pure because it's 217 liters when someone just dumped 100 liters of urine inside. No one's going to use that, right? 100 liters of urine is a lot of urine to fall inside 217 liters of water. So all of the ulama are saying that, yeah, we get it. If the impurity is clearly visible, then no one's going to allow you to use it. We're talking about you have water, some impurity fell. No one really knows. Right? A very interesting example is again given in the Hanafi school. They say that water is not considered to be a large amount of water. Is when you dig a hole or you have a reservoir that is such, if somebody makes movement on one side, water on the other side will not immediately move. Now, the reason why they say immediately, because eventually the ripples will go through, right? But they're saying that if somebody is standing on one side moving the water, the movement is not, meaning the reservoir is large enough that movement does not immediately happen on the other side. Right? This was the experiment that was conducted by that scholar from the subcontinent. He dug a ditch like this, and then he threw in qullatayn, and qullatayn satisfied the criteria. So he said that the Hanafis and the Shafi'is have no difference in opinion here. They both are saying the exact same thing. Right? So this kind of tells us that what we are taking into consideration is that if someone, so what does that mean? That means, for example, we have a pool of water, okay? You have a pool of water. You're on one side. Someone comes on the other side and they start urinating on the other side. Can you use the water on this side? Technically, yes. Okay, but what if you go right beside where that person is urinating, you start using the water? Smart idea, right? No, obviously when you pick up that water, what's gonna be in it? Urine. It's gonna be clearly visible. You can smell it. You can probably taste it, right? Not very pleasant. But again, you get the point. If someone, for example, okay, the same rule we apply to a large amount of water, we also apply the same rule to flowing water, a river. Okay. Flowing water does not become impure unless the impurity is clearly visible. Because what does that mean? Because that means people can dump whatever they want in that water. That water will be pure. Until you start using the water and the water is black. Oh, that means the impurity is overpowering the water. Right? There is a very famous river that would satisfy anyone who believes in anything. Right? The river is in India. Right? The Ganges River. Right? The Hindus, every single year, thousands, millions of the population of India is like close to 1 billion. It's a huge number. Every single year, Millions, hundreds of millions of people are bathing inside that water. I've visited that region. I've seen it with my own eyes. The water is not clear. That water is probably the filthiest water on the face of this earth. It's huge though. It's massive. It is massive. No alim on the face of this earth will probably tell you that's not a large amount of water. Yeah, but every single one will stop you from using it. Right? They'll stop you from using it. So that's the point. So if the water meets the threshold, you can clearly tell something inside. But they talk about the time of Baghdad, that when Genghis Khan and his son Halaku, they attacked Baghdad, and Baghdad was toppled and basically leveled with the ground. They burnt entire libraries, were put up in flames, and so many books, Islamic books, were thrown into the river at that time in Baghdad. So much so that the water of the river began flowing black with the ink. That water you were not able to use that water for wudu, because the water is clearly changed. Again, it's not an impurity, but still the water is black. You can't use that water. It's not regular water anymore. It has so much ink inside that it's become black. And so he says, the Prophet ﷺ was asked about such water. He says, if it meets the threshold of qullatain, 217 liters approximately, give or take, because it will not become impure. He goes, the hadith tells us, مفهوم الحديث أنه إذا كان الماء أقل من قلتين ينجس ولو لم يتغير. Because the hadith tells us that if the water is less than 217 liters, then it will become impure even if there were no changes. Meaning one drop of urine will contaminate 200 liters of water. One drop. Even if you cannot tell that there is one drop of urine. So long as you know. Right? So long as you know, or someone who knows informed you. But you don't need to be suspicious maybe something found inside. That's not your concern. You can't live life in the maybe situation. So the scholars, they say, al-yaqeen la yazulu bi-shak. Right? That certainty will never be removed with doubt. This is a very, very famous rule, right? You remember making wudu, you have doubt whether your wudu broke or not. You have wudu. You remember using the washroom, you don't remember making wudu or not. You don't have wudu. Right? And whatever you're certain of is what you're going to go back to. So you're certain to use the washroom, you're uncertain whether you made wudu or not. That means you don't have wudu. Right? You made wudu, you're uncertain whether you broke the wudu or not. That means you have wudu, you're good. Right? You have wudu, you're good. ومفهوم ودل على هذا المفهوم ما رواه مسلم, because there's another hadith that supports this. Abu Hurairah's hadith in Sahih Muslim, the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam's hadith came before. إذا استيقظ أحدكم من نومه, when someone wakes up from their sleep, فلا يغمس يده في الإناء, they should not dip their hand into the vessel. حتى يغسلها ثلاثا, until they wash it 3 times. فإنه لا يدري أين باتت يده, because that person does not know where their hand has spent the night. You could have some impurity on your hand, and then you're about to make wudu, and a wise guy dips his hand inside the vessel of water. For all that you know, the vessel of water could be contaminated now, because you had some impurity on your hand. Right? The Prophet ﷺ. So from here we understand what? On the mere possibility that you might have something on your hand, the Prophet said, don't dip your hand inside a vessel of water. Obviously, a vessel of water is a small amount of water. That means a small amount of water could become impure. Right? Like that. فقد نهى المستيقظ من نومه عن الغمس خشية تلوث يده بالنجاسة غير المرئية. Because the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, he prohibits the one who wakes up from their sleep from dipping their hand out of fear that their hand was soiled in impurity that was unseen. ومعلوم أن النجاسة غير المرئية لا تغير الماء. Knowing that najasa that cannot be seen will not change the water. Nothing's going to change, right? But if you know that najasa, impurity fell inside, then it's over. فَلَوْلَا أَنَّهَا تُنَجِّسُ بِمُجَرَّدِ الْمُلَاقَاةِ لَمْ يَنْوَ عَنْ ذَلِكَ. If it was not the case that merely the impurity meeting the water would make the water impure, Prophet would not have told you not to do it. And the Prophet told you don't dip your hand inside. Why? Because the moment you dip your hand, even if you can't see the impurity, if you know that there's impurity, the water will become impure. Right? The second type of water is water with a large amount, which is 217 liters, قلتين or more. وهذا الماء لا ينجس بمجرد وقوع النجاسة فيه. This type of water, a large amount, will not become impure by najasa, impurity merely falling inside. وإنما ينجس إذا غيرت النجاسة أحد أوصافه الثلاثة. The water will only become impure when the impurity changes one of its three attributes: the color, or the taste, or the smell. وَدَلِيلُ وَالْإِجْمَاعِ. And the proof of this is the consensus of the ummah. قال النووي رحمه الله تعالى في المجموع قال ابن المنذر أجمعوا أن الماء القليل أو الكثير إذا وقعت في نجاسة فغيرت طعما أو لونا أو ريحا فهو نجس. Nawawi رحمه الله تعالى, he quotes a scholar before Ibn al-Mundhir who says that the ummah has agreed upon the fact that a small amount or a large amount of water that changes in color, taste, or smell from the impurity will become impure. Doesn't matter how much it is. If the color, the taste, or the smell changes, the water is no longer pure. It is now impure. ما يصلح منها للتطهير. So he says, okay. He goes, وهذه المياه الأربعة. So he just counted to you 4 categories of water. Water that was pure and purifying. Water that was pure, purifying, but it was makruh, disliked to use. Water that was pure but not purifying. Water that was impure. Right? 4 categories. He goes, these 4 categories of water, لَيْسَتْ كُلَّهَا صَالِحَةً لِلطَّهَارَةِ. Because not all of them are capable of purifying you, like you clearly have seen now. كما علمت بل إنما الذي يصلح منها هو النوع الأول والثاني. He goes, the only ones that could actually purify you were the first one and the second one, but remember the second one was disliked to use. He says مع كراهة النوع الثاني في البدن. أما النوع الثالث, the third category, فلا يصلح التطهر به. You cannot use the third one to purify. Remember, it was pure, but you can't purify with it. وإن كان طاهرا في ذات, even though it's pure in and of itself. بحيث يصح استعماله في غير الطهارة. You can use it for other things. You can drink it, right? You can drink it. You can cook with it. You can do whatever you want with it. You just can't use it for wudu. You cannot use it to purify. أما النوع الرابع, and obviously the fourth one that we just completed now, for متنجس, it is the water that's impure. لا يصلح لشيء. You cannot use it for anything. Impure water cannot be used for anything. You cannot use it to for purification. Clearly, you can also not use it to drink. You cannot use it for anything of that sort. Right? You have to dump it. Basically, you have to get rid of it. Right? You cannot give it to another person to drink either. You cannot use it at all. Right? The impure water. So that concludes the discussion on water. He then has one more discussion before he then moves on to some other things pertaining to wudu. More specifically, he has a discussion regarding different vessels that you can or cannot use. Inshallah, we'll continue with that. We will have one bonus class at the end of this month. I think July 30th is a Thursday. So there's the 5th, no 6th. How many Thursdays in this month? That's the 5th one. So the 5th one, so again, usually you have 1 and 3. We'll have it on the 5th because I will not be here next month. So we'll have one bonus class before that, so that inshallah, that way we only actually miss 1 class. We don't miss 2. So we'll do basically August class at the end of July, inshallah. Yes.
I heard, I'm not sure if it's for Shaf'i's own madhabs. Pubic hair that's cut it off, that's considered as najis.
Technically, as long as there's no impurity on it, that's not true.
Really?
Yeah.
They make a video